For 9 nights, a man named Andre Jacobs slept sitting up on a cold park bench in downtown Cleveland, his back straight, his eyes never fully closing, because his 2 5-year-old twins were asleep against his chest under a single thin blanket, and somebody had to stay awake to keep them warm and keep them safe. He was 32 years old. He was an Army veteran. 14 months earlier, he had a wife, an apartment, and a job. And then, in the space of a single afternoon, he lost the wife. And everything else came apart behind her, like a thread pulled loose. He could have gone to a shelter. He didn't, for one reason, the same reason he did everything. The system might have separated him from his twins, or split the twins from each other into different placements. And Andre Jacobs had lived his whole life by one rule, learned in the Army and carved deeper by grief. Nobody gets left behind, not on his watch, not his men, and God knows not his babies. So he slept sitting up on a bench for 9 nights, and kept them fed, and kept them clean, and told them it was camping. And on the 9th cold morning, a large man in a dark suit, the personal bodyguard of one of the most powerful men in the city, a man whose actual assignment that morning was to make Andre and his children disappear from in front of his boss's building, walked up to that bench. And instead of telling Andre to move along, he stopped, and he sat down beside him. What happened next did not change just one family's life. It is the reason this story exists. Stay with me all the way to the end, because the moment that bodyguard sat down is a moment you are going to feel in your chest. And before we begin, do me one kindness and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It always means more than you know. The morning began, as all of Andre Jacobs' mornings now began, before the sun, because a man sleeping upright on a bench does not really sleep. He only rests in pieces, surfacing every hour to check the blanket, to check the dark, to count 2 small breathing shapes against him, and make sure they were still 2. The park was called Lakeview Green, a square of grass and old trees in the middle of downtown Cleveland, ringed on all 4 sides by glass towers that came alive with light at 7 and went dark at night, and in the gray hour before the towers woke. The park belonged to the people the city would rather not see. Andre had learned their faces over 9 nights. He nodded to them. He did not bother them, and they did not bother him, because there is a code among people who have fallen all the way through. And the code is mostly about leaving each other what little dignity the fall has not yet taken. There were others in the park at night, and Andre had learned them. There was an old woman the others called Miss Birdie, who slept 3 benches down and had been out here, someone said, for 11 years, and who had taken one look at the twins on the first night and started, without a word, leaving things, a clean pair of child's mittens one morning, half a bag of crackers another, set quietly on the end of Andre's bench while he pretended to sleep. Because that is the code. You do not embarrass a man by handing it to him. You leave it where he can find it and keep his face. There was a younger man named Dex, who talked to people who were not there and who, for reasons Andre never learned, appointed himself a kind of sentry, sitting up at the far end some nights, watching the path, and once running off a pair of teenagers who had drifted too close to where the children slept. There is an idea people have about the homeless, that it is every man for himself out there. And it is the opposite of true. The people who have fallen all the way through look out for each other with a fierceness the comfortable rarely manage, because they know exactly how far the fall is and exactly how little stands between any of them and worse. And Andre Jacobs, who had thought he knew about brotherhood from the Army, learned a second kind of it on those benches, the brotherhood of the people the world had agreed to stop seeing. The 4th night was the worst. A cold front came through off the lake, the temperature dropping through the evening, and Andre felt it coming the way you feel weather in your bones after enough nights outside. And he did the math. 2 small bodies, 1 blanket, his own jacket, the hours until dawn. And he made the only decision the math allowed. He took off his field jacket and laid it over the twins on top of the blanket. And he sat there through the worst of the cold in his shirt sleeves, awake, his arms around the bundle of them. And he did not sleep at all that night. Not in pieces, not at all. He simply sat the watch, hour after hour, his teeth set, telling himself the thing he told himself, that a man can stand almost anything for 1 more hour, and then for 1 more hour after that. Toward 4 in the morning, Miss Birdie shuffled over without a word and draped her own spare coat, a man's coat 3 sizes too big, over Andre's shoulders, patted him once on the arm like a grandmother, and shuffled back to her bench. And Andre Jacobs, who had not cried since the kitchen sink, sat in the dark in a stranger's coat with his children breathing against him, and wept without making a sound from the cold and the grief and the unbearable kindness of a woman who had nothing giving him the only thing she had. He gave the coat back at dawn. She would not take the thanks. That is the code. At the first real light, Andre eased out from under the twins, slow, so as not to wake them, and folded his own jacket under their heads to replace the warmth of his body. And he stood and stretched the cold knots out of his back and began the part of the day he had decided, on the very first morning, would never be allowed to slip. He filled an old water bottle at the park fountain. He wet a clean cloth, and he woke Maya first because she woke easier. And he washed her face and her hands, the way he did every single morning. Gentle, thorough, the way you tend something precious. And then Malik, who grumbled. And he combed their hair, and he checked their teeth, and he laced their small matching sneakers, and he looked them both over head to toe the way a man inspects a formation. And only when they were clean and neat and squared away did Andre Jacobs allow himself to feel, for 1 private second, the full crushing weight of where they all were. Because here is the thing he had decided, the line he had drawn in himself, that explains everything else he did. They could be homeless. He could not stop that, not yet. But they were not going to be dirty, and they were not going to be hungry, and they were not going to be afraid. Not if there was a single thing left in him to spend on it. Because a child does not know the word homeless. A child knows whether their daddy seems scared. A child knows whether they are clean and whether they are fed and whether the person holding them is calm. And so every morning, Andre performed the small, fierce, invisible labor of making 2 5-year-olds believe that the worst thing that had ever happened to their family was, in fact, an adventure. He told them they were camping. He told them the towers were a castle. He made it a game to be quiet and good. And he gave them, every morning, the one thing he had left in unlimited supply, which was the absolute certainty that their father had them, that whatever else was true, they were not going to be left behind. If a story about a father holding the line for his children when he has nothing left to hold it with is the reason you're here tonight, then make sure you're subscribed. Because how Andre Jacobs ended up on that bench, and who finally sat down beside him, is the whole reason this story exists. He had not always been on a bench. That was the part strangers never imagined, looking at a man and 2 kids sleeping rough. 14 months earlier, Andre Jacobs had a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side that was small and a little drafty and entirely theirs, and a job running a press brake at a metal fabrication shop, a good job, a skilled job, the kind a man could build on, and a wife named Tanya who laughed with her whole body and could not cook to save her life, and was the best thing that had ever happened to him. They had met after he came home from the army. He had served 2 tours, come back quieter than he left, the way a lot of them do. And Tanya had been the one who waited out the quiet, who sat with him through the bad nights and never once flinched, who taught him that he was allowed to put the war down now, that he was home, that he could build something instead of just surviving it. They had the twins 3 years into the marriage, Malik and Maya, 7 minutes apart, and Andre Jacobs, who had once believed he would not live to 30, had stood in a hospital hallway holding 2 babies and understood for the first time what his whole life had been for. He had come home from the second tour wrong, the way a lot of them came home, not damaged in any way a stranger could see. Just turned down low, quiet, easily startled, awake at the wrong hours. He had not known how to be a person who was not at war. And Tanya, who he met at a cousin's cookout 3 months after he got back, had looked at all of that. The quiet and the flinch and the long stares at nothing, and had not been frightened off by any of it. She had a way of sitting with him through the bad nights without trying to fix them, of putting a hand flat on his chest in the dark when the dreams came, and just leaving it there until his breathing slowed, of talking to him about ordinary nothing things. The price of tomatoes, a song she liked, until the world reassembled itself into a place a man could live in. She used to tell him that he was not broken. He was just carrying something heavy, and that she was strong enough to carry the other end of it. And over the years, without his quite noticing the day it happened, she did. And the load got lighter, and the dreams came less. And Andre Jacobs learned the thing his war had nearly cost him, which was how to be home. The twins had been her courage more than his, because Andre had been afraid of bringing children into a world he had seen the underside of, afraid of being his own absent father, afraid in the bottomless way of a man who loves something and knows exactly how badly the world can take it. Tanya had told him that you do not get to refuse the good things out of fear of losing them, that is just losing them in advance, on purpose, for free. So they had the twins. And Tanya had been right, the way she was right about most things. Because the moment Andre held those 2 babies, 7 minutes apart, every cold and careful thing the war had built in him cracked open. And what came out was a love so total, it frightened him worse than any firefight. He thought he had a lifetime to spend it. That is the mercy and the cruelty of an ordinary Tuesday. It never tells you it is the last one. Tanya died on an ordinary Tuesday in September. There was no warning, no illness to fight, no time to say anything. A blood vessel in her brain that no one had known was there gave way while she was standing at the kitchen sink. And she was gone before the ambulance reached the hospital, 31 years old. And the life Andre had so carefully built came down so fast and so completely that for weeks afterward, he could not have told you what day it was. People do not understand how quickly it happens. How a family that is doing fine, that is paying its bills and getting by, can come apart. It is not one disaster. It is the way one disaster pulls all the others down behind it. Tanya's small income was gone. The child care they had arranged around 2 working parents made no sense for one grieving father who could no longer work the shifts the fabrication shop needed. And when he started missing work to care for the twins, the shop, which was not cruel, just a business, let him go. The funeral, which he had done as simply as he could, still cost money he did not have, and went onto a card. And grief, real grief, the kind that takes a man's wife at the kitchen sink, does not let you think clearly about money or schedules or the slow, quiet arithmetic of ruin while it is happening. By the time Andre surfaced enough to fight, the apartment was 3 months behind, and the eviction was already moving, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The shop had not wanted to let him go. That was almost the worst of it, that there was no villain in it. Just the slow, indifferent grind of how things are. His foreman, a decent man named Pruitt, had carried him for 2 months, had looked the other way on the missed shifts and the days Andre came in hollow-eyed and useless with grief. Until the orders backed up and the owners started asking questions. And Pruitt had finally called Andre into the little glass office and told him, miserable about it, that he had to make it official, that he was sorry, that Andre was the best brake operator he had ever had, and the door would be open when he got himself together. But there was no getting himself together on the schedule a job requires, because grief does not file paperwork, and a 5-year-old does not understand why Daddy cannot stop staring at the wall. And there was no one to watch the twins now that there was no second income to pay for watching them. And the whole carefully balanced machine of a working family, which had needed 2 adults to run, simply could not be run by one drowning man. The eviction came the way they come. Not as a single dramatic moment, but as a slow accumulation of papers, each one more final than the last, until a date arrived, and a man in a yellow vest changed the locks, while Andre carried what would fit into the car in laundry baskets, the twins watching from the back seat, Maya asking why they were taking all their things outside, and Andre telling her, with a smile that cost him everything he had, that they were going on a trip. The car became the apartment for a while, and he kept it the way he kept everything, clean and on a schedule, parking in a different safe spot each night, the twins in the back, him upright in the front, until the morning on the highway when the engine made a sound like a gunshot and seized, and the tow came, and the bill to fix a thrown rod was $1,100 Andre did not have and would never have, and the impound fees ate the rest. After the car, there was no more falling left to do. After the car, there was only the ground, and the ground, in downtown Cleveland in late October, was a park bench under 4 glass towers. They lived in the car for a while after that. A lot of people do, more than anyone knows, and Andre kept it clean and kept the twins on a routine and kept looking for work, real work, that he could do with 2 5-year-olds and no childcare. Which is to say, work that did not exist. And then the car, which was old, threw a rod on the highway, and the repair cost more than the car was worth. And the tow and the impound ate the last of what he had. And on a Wednesday in late October, Andre Jacobs walked out of an impound lot in downtown Cleveland with 2 duffel bags, a stroller, a battered red picture book, and his 2 children, and nowhere on this earth to go. He had thought about the shelter. Of course he had. But Andre had spent enough time around the systems that catch falling people to know the things the brochures don't say. He knew that a lot of emergency shelters separate men from women and children, that a father with kids can be a complication and the system does not quite know what to do with, that there were stories, true ones, of families split into different placements, of children sent one way and a parent sent another, of a man losing not just his housing but his kids, swept into care because he could not prove he could provide a home, the very thing he had no home to provide. Maybe it would not have happened that way. Maybe the people there would have been kind and kept them together. But Andre Jacobs had buried his wife 14 months ago, and the one thing he had left, the only thing, was that he had not let go of his children, not for one night, and he was not going to gamble the last thing he had on maybe. He had a rule. He had carried it out of the army, and it had only gotten stronger since the kitchen sink. Nobody gets left behind. Not on my watch. He would sleep sitting up on a bench in the cold for as long as it took, awake, on guard, before he would hand his twins to a system and pray it kept them together. So that is what he did. He had tried it once, before the bench, which was how he knew. In the first week after the car, With the cold coming, Andre had swallowed his fear and walked the twins into a family services intake downtown. Because that is what you are supposed to do. Because the brochures all say there is help. He had sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights with a clipboard and answered the questions. And the woman across the desk had been kind, genuinely kind, overworked and underpaid and kind. And that had almost made it worse. Because what she told him, gently, working through the realities of a system that was full to bursting, was that the emergency beds that night were in 2 different facilities, that the family shelter was full, that the best they could likely do on short notice was a bed for him in the men's intake and an emergency placement for the children, separately. Just for a night or 2. Just until something opened up. And that the children, being twins, being 5, might or might not be placed together depending on what was available, and that he should understand this was temporary, that they would work to reunify quickly, that this was normal. Reunify. Andre had sat in that plastic chair and heard the word reunify applied to himself and his 5-year-old twins, and something cold and absolute had closed in his chest because he knew how systems used the word temporary. He knew that quickly meant nothing, and that placements got extended, and that a father with no address and no income was, on paper, exactly the kind of case that was easy to lose track of. He had thought about Malik and Maya waking in the night in some strange placement without each other and without him, calling for a daddy who had handed them to strangers and signed a form. And he had stood up and thanked the kind, tired woman and walked his children back out into the cold. He was not judging anyone who took that bed. He understood, better than most, that for some families it was the only door, and that the people working those desks were doing heroic work with nothing. But Andre Jacobs had a rule, and the rule did not bend, not for cold, not for hunger, not for exhaustion. Nobody gets left behind. He would find another way, or die finding it. So he found the bench. Here is something most people do not know, and that the word homeless hides more than it reveals. The fastest growing group of people without homes in America is not the men you picture on a heating grate. It is families, mothers and fathers with children, often working, often doing everything right, one emergency away from the street and then over the edge of it. Most of them are never seen because family homelessness mostly hides in cars, in motels paid for by the week, on the couches of relatives who can barely afford themselves, in the careful, exhausting performance of normalcy that parents like Andre put on so their children will not be afraid. And veterans, men and women who served, carry a heightened risk of all of it. The wounds you can see and the ones you can't following them home and making the climb back that much steeper. Andre Jacobs was not a rare and tragic exception. He was, but for the bench being visible, almost completely invisible, which is the truest thing about how this kind of suffering works. It happens in plain sight, to people we walk past, performing fine until they can't. By the 8th night, Andre Jacobs was running out of the one thing he had been spending most freely, which was his own body. He had not slept more than an hour at a stretch in over a week. He had given the twins most of the food, and on the 8th evening, Maya started to cough, a small wet cough that any parent knows the sound of and dreads, the sound of a cold that a warm house shrugs off and a cold bench turns into something worse. And Andre sat up the whole of that night, with his hand on her small back, feeling her breathe, doing the terrible arithmetic of a parent with no good options. He knew that if the cough turned into a fever, he would have to take her to an emergency room, and that an emergency room would ask where they lived, and that the answer might be the very thing that finally brought the system down on them and split them up. The exact outcome he had frozen on a bench for 9 nights to prevent. he had no move left. He could keep her warm, or he could keep her safe from the system. But the cold was making it impossible to do both. And Andre Jacobs, who had faced enemy fire without coming apart, sat on a bench in the dark and felt for the first time the specific terror of a father who has run out of road. He prayed that night, which he had not done since Tanya. He did not ask for a house or a job or a rescue, because he had stopped believing in those. He asked only for one more warm enough night, and then one more, the way he had taught himself to ask for only one more hour. And he asked whoever might be listening to look out for his babies if his own strength gave out. Then dawn came, gray and cold over the towers, and Maya's cough was no worse, and Andre squared his shoulders and washed his children's faces at the fountain and laced their shoes and got them ready for a day he had no plan to survive. He did not know, could not have known, that this was the 9th morning, and that the morning you are finally rescued looks exactly like the morning before it, right up until someone walks across the grass and sits down. For 9 nights, the towers of downtown Cleveland looked down on the park and did not see him. And then, on the 9th morning, one of them did. The man who saw him was not the CEO. Not at first. The man who saw him was the CEO's bodyguard, and his name was Gabe Mercer. Gabe Mercer was 46 years old and had spent 22 years as a soldier before he ever put on a suit. And he was very good at the thing he did now, which was to keep Everett Crane, the founder and chief executive of Crane Industries, safe and unbothered as he moved through a world that mostly wanted something from him. Crane Industries owned 2 of the 4 towers that ringed Lakeview Green, including the one with Everett Crane's office on the top floor. And Everett Crane had a habit, a discipline really, of walking a circuit of the park every morning at 6:40 before the city woke, with Gabe a respectful 3 steps behind, because Everett said the walking was the only time his head was quiet. And it had become, over the past week and a half, an unspoken awkwardness on those walks that there was a man and 2 small children living on a bench along their route, and that the building's security, which answered to Gabe, had a standing instruction, one Gabe had never loved and had carried out for years anyway, to keep the area in front of Crane property clear of, in the language of the policy, persons creating an unfavorable impression for tenants and clients. Gabe had watched the man on the bench for over a week, the way a soldier watches anything in his sector. And what he had seen had been slowly working on him in a place he did not have words for. He had seen the man wake before dawn and wash his children's faces. He had seen him lace their shoes and check them over like a sergeant doing inspection. And Gabe Mercer had felt something turn over in his chest, because he knew that bearing. He knew that straight back in that economy of motion. He had served beside 1,000 men who moved exactly like that. He had seen the man give the children his own food and eat nothing. He had seen him, on the coldest night, take off his own jacket and add it to the blanket over the twins and sit there in his shirt sleeves in the cold, awake, watching the dark. And Gabe Mercer, who had stood a great many watches in his life, had recognized a man standing one. Gabe had a reason he could not name out loud, a reason he had buried under 22 years of discipline and 9 years of standing 3 steps behind Everett Crane. And the man on the bench had been digging it back up all week. His name had been Tovar. They had served together, 2 tours, and Tovar had been the funniest man Gabe ever knew and one of the bravest. And Tovar had come home, like Gabe, turned down low. Except Tovar had not had a Tanya, had not had anyone who sat with him through the bad nights, and the quiet in him had curdled where Gabe's had healed. Gabe had lost track of him the way you lose track of people. A few years of meaning to call, and then one winter he had heard, secondhand, that Tovar had been living rough, and a few months after that Tovar was gone, dead under an overpass of the cold and the drink and the thing the war left in him that nobody ever sat with. Gabe Mercer had carried that a long time, the call he never made, the brother he let slip, and he had made a private peace with it by being very good at his job and not looking too hard at the people his job moved along. Because if he looked too hard, he would see Tovar in every one of them, and a man cannot do that and still do the work. And then a man had appeared on a bench in Lakeview Green with a soldier's back and two small children, and Gabe had not been able to stop seeing him. He had watched all that week the way you watch a wound you keep meaning to clean. He had seen the man give up his jacket on the cold night. He had seen the old woman give the man her coat. He had seen the morning inspections, the washed faces, the laced shoes. And he had thought, every single morning, that is a soldier, that is a brother, that is Tovar with two kids and maybe one more good year in him before the cold or the system or the despair takes him too. And somebody is going to walk past him every morning the way everybody walked past Tovar. And that somebody, God help me, is me. By the 9th morning, Gabe Mercer had not slept well in a week. And when the supervisor offered to send officers to move the man along, something 22 years and one dead brother in the making finally came loose. On the 9th morning, Everett Crane finished his walk and went up to his office, and the building's day shift security supervisor approached Gabe near the lobby and said, in the bored voice of a man relaying an unpleasant chore, that the situation with the bench was generating complaints, that a couple of tenants had mentioned the children, that it didn't look good, and that he was going to send a couple of officers out to move them along unless Gabe wanted to handle it. And Gabe Mercer, head of security, 22 years a soldier, stood in the warm marble lobby and looked out through the glass at the man in shirt sleeves on the bench with two clean, fed, cared-for children. And he heard himself say, "I'll handle it." He did not handle it the way the supervisor expected. This is the part of the story I most want you to be here for. So if you are not subscribed, do it now. Because what one man chose to do, instead of what he was told to do, is the hinge the whole rest of this turns on. Gabe Mercer walked out across the cold grass, and he did not loom over the man the way you loom over someone you are about to move along. He came around to the front of the bench, slow, hands visible, and he stopped a respectful distance away, and he said, "Mind if I sit down?" Andre Jacobs looked up at the large man in the dark suit, and he knew exactly who he was and exactly why he was there. Because Andre had clocked Gabe on the very first morning the same way Gabe had clocked him. Two men recognizing each other's training across a park. He had been waiting 9 days to be moved along. He gathered the twins a little closer, and he kept his voice low and even, and he said, "We'll be gone in 10 minutes. We're not looking for any trouble. Just let me get their shoes on." And he started, with a terrible practiced dignity, to pack up, because a man who has been told to move along enough times learns to move himself before he can be moved. "I'm not here to move you along," Gabe said, and he sat down on the far end of the bench, leaving the twins between them, and he let out a breath. And for a moment, the two of them just sat there in the cold, two big disciplined men and two small children, and neither said anything. Then Gabe nodded at the way the kids were dressed, clean, neat, hair combed, and he said quietly, "You keep them squared away. Even out here, that's not easy. I've seen grown men with houses can't keep themselves squared away like that." He paused. "Where'd you serve?" And Andre Jacobs, who had not let his guard down with another human being in 14 months, who had held the whole crushing weight of it alone because there had been no one and nothing he could afford to lean on, felt something in his chest crack at that one word. Served, at being seen as what he was. A soldier. A father. a man holding a line instead of a problem in front of a building. His eyes filled, and he was furious at himself for it. And he blinked it back hard, and he told Gabe where he'd served. 2 tours, and Gabe told him where he'd served, and they found, the way soldiers do, the overlapping edges of a world they both knew. And somewhere in the finding of it, the wall Andre had built came down. Just a little, just enough. They talked for an hour. Gabe Mercer was supposed to be at his post. He stayed on that bench and let a man tell him the whole thing, the kitchen sink and the job and the eviction and the car and the rule about nobody getting left behind. And Gabe listened the way you listen to a brother. And the twins, sensing the safety in it the way children do, went back to their book. Maya reading the red picture book aloud to Malik in the careful, made-up way of a child who has the whole thing memorized. And when Andre was done, Gabe Mercer sat there a long moment, and then he said, "You did right. Splitting them up, even for a night, you'd never have forgiven yourself. You did right." And then he said, "I need you to stay here. Don't go anywhere. Give me an hour. There's somebody I need to talk to." And Andre, who had no reason left to trust anyone and every reason not to, looked at the man and saw the soldier in him and decided to trust him anyway. Because sometimes the last thing you have left to spend is faith, and you spend it, and you see. There was a moment in that hour that Gabe would carry the rest of his life. Andre had been telling him about the rule, nobody gets left behind, where it came from and what it had cost. And Maya, hearing her father's voice go rough, had climbed into his lap with the red book and said, "Read it, Daddy." The way children do when they sense a grown-up needs rescuing, and the only rope they have is routine. And Andre had taken a breath and steadied his voice and read his daughter the book right there, with the bodyguard sitting beside him, the whole familiar sing-song of it. And Gabe had watched a man who had not slept in days and not had help in over a year set down his own breaking in order to make his child feel that the world was a warm and orderly place. He understood that he was looking at the truest kind of strength there is, the kind that has nothing left and spends it anyway on someone smaller. When the book was done and Maya had wandered off to show Malik a pigeon, Andre had looked at Gabe and said, "Quiet." The only thing he asked for in the whole hour. "If something ever happens to me out here," he said, "you find somebody good for them. You don't let them go into the system separate. Promise me a stranger will at least know to ask for that." And Gabe Mercer, who had not been able to save Tovar, looked this man in the eye and made him the promise, and then made himself a second one, silently, which was that it was not going to come to that. Not this time. Not on his watch. That this was the one he was going to get to in time. Gabe Mercer rode the elevator to the top floor of the Crane Industries tower and walked past the assistant who tried to stop him and into the office of the most powerful man he knew. And he closed the door. Everett Crane was 58 years old, and he had built Crane Industries from a single welding truck into a company with 11,000 employees. And he had done it by being, in his own estimation, a realist, a man who saw things as they were and did what was necessary. And the people around him used softer words than hard, but they all meant the same thing. He had come up from nothing. That was the part he had stopped telling people, the part he had, in a way, stopped telling himself, because the story did not fit the man he had become. Everett Crane had grown up poor, the kind of poor that Andre Jacobs' children were living right now, and he had clawed his way out of it with a ferocity that had served him brilliantly in business and cost him, somewhere along the way, the softer things, a marriage, a closeness with his own grown children, the memory of what it had actually felt like to be the one the world wished would disappear. He had become a man whose buildings had a policy about people who created an unfavorable impression. And he had signed that policy without once connecting it to the boy he had been, sleeping 4 to a room above a shuttered store. The boy whose own father had worked 3 jobs and still come up short and still, somehow, kept them all together. Gabe Mercer had worked for Everett Crane for 9 years and had never once spoken to him about anything but the schedule and the perimeter. Now he stood in front of the man's desk and said, "I need 5 minutes, and I need you to just listen because I've never asked you for anything." And Everett Crane, who respected exactly 2 things in this world, competence and nerve, and saw both in his security chief's face, set down his pen and said, "Go." So Gabe told him about the man on the bench, the veteran, 2 tours, the wife who died at the kitchen sink, the job lost to grief, the eviction, the car, the 9 nights, and the rule: nobody gets left behind, and what it meant that this man would rather freeze upright on a bench than risk a system that might take his kids, and how he kept those children so clean and so fed and so unafraid that you would never know, walking past, that they had slept outside, and how the building wanted them moved along this morning, and how Gabe had instead sat down. "I've moved 100 people along from in front of your buildings," Gabe said. "I never thought twice. It's the job. But that man down there is doing the hardest thing I have ever watched a human being do, and he's doing it alone, and he's doing it right, and I could not move him along, sir. I couldn't do it. So I'm here. I don't know what you can do or what you will, but I had to tell you he's down there, because somebody should have seen him 8 nights ago, and nobody did, including me, and I'm done not seeing him." Everett Crane was quiet for a long time. He turned his chair and looked out the great window at the park, 30 floors below, the little square of green, the bench he could not quite make out from here. And Gabe watched something move across the old man's face that he had never seen there in 9 years. Everett Crane was not thinking about Andre Jacobs, not exactly. He was thinking about a boy above a shuttered store, and a father who worked 3 jobs and kept them together. A father who had been, Everett realized with a force that took the breath out of him, exactly the kind of man now sitting on a bench 30 floors below him. The kind of man Everett's own policy would have moved along. Everett Crane had grown up in a place and a way he had spent 40 years and a great deal of money trying to put behind him. 4 of them in 2 rooms above a shuttered hardware store. After the mill closed and the town began its long dying. His mother gone early. His father, a man with enormous hands and an 8th grade education and a refusal to be beaten, that he had passed to his son like a blood type. Working 3 jobs, the day shift at a packing plant 2 towns over. A janitor's round at a school in the evenings, weekends fixing whatever the neighbors could half afford to have fixed. And somehow, through all of it, keeping his 2 boys together, fed, in school, and convinced against all available evidence that they were going to be all right. There had been a winter, when Everett was 9, the year the packing plant cut hours, when they had lost even the 2 rooms for a stretch, and his father had kept them on the floors of friends, and for 2 weeks Everett never spoke of, in the cab of a borrowed truck, and had never once, not for a single day, let his boys feel that the world had won. Everett had not let himself think about that winter in years. He had built a tower so he would never be cold in a truck again. And in the building of it, he had filed the winter away as something that had happened to a weaker person, a boy he had outgrown. What he had not reckoned with was the cost of outgrowing the boy. Somewhere in the climb, Everett Crane had become hard in a way his father never was, because his father's hardness had been wrapped around a softness, around the boys, around a reason. And Everett's hardness had slowly become the whole of him. No center left to protect, just edge. His wife had left 15 years ago, tired of being managed instead of loved. His 2 grown children spoke to him on holidays in the careful tones you use with a difficult client. He had 11,000 employees and a tower with his name on it, and he ate dinner alone most nights. And he had told himself this was the price of never being cold in a truck again. He had believed it, right up until his head of security walked into his office and described a man on a bench who was doing, with nothing, the one thing Everett's father had done and Everett himself had failed to do, which was to keep, against everything, the people who were his close. He had spent 40 years becoming the man at the top of the tower. He had forgotten that he had started as the boy the tower looked down on, and it had taken his bodyguard, of all people, to walk in and make him look. "Bring him up," Everett Crane said. His voice was not quite steady. "The children, too. Bring them somewhere warm and get them something to eat, and then bring them up. And Gabe?" He turned around. "Thank you for not moving him along. If your chest is tight right now, you are exactly where this story wanted you, and this is the moment to subscribe, because what Everett Crane does next and what Andre says back to him is the whole reason I wanted to tell you this one. They brought Andre and the twins up not to a conference room, but to a quiet office with a sofa. And someone brought hot food, real food. And Andre made the twins eat first and wash their hands first and say thank you. And watched them with an exhaustion so deep it looked like calm. And Everett Crane came in, this formidable old man in a $4,000 suit. And he did not stand over Andre. He sat down across from him, the way Gabe had sat down on the bench. And for a moment, the founder of Crane Industries did not know how to begin, because the boy he used to be and the man he had become were both in the room, and they did not agree on what to say. "I'm told you served," Everett began finally. "I'm told a great deal about you. I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Jacobs, because I think you're a man who'd rather have it straight. The building you've been sleeping in front of is mine. The policy that would have had you moved along this morning is mine. I signed it. I never once thought about who it was being used on. And my head of security had to walk into my office and shame me, without meaning to, into remembering something I worked very hard for 40 years to forget, which is that I was you. Not like you. You. A poor kid that the people in the tall buildings wished would disappear. My father kept us together through worse than a bench, 3 jobs, and a will like iron, and I have spent my whole life since trying to never be that vulnerable again. And somewhere in there, I became a man who'd have had your children moved off my sidewalk before breakfast. So before I say anything else, I want to say I'm sorry. Not for being rich. For forgetting. Andre Jacobs did not say anything. He had learned, in 14 months, to be very careful with kindness, because kindness from powerful people often came with a hook in it. And he was holding everything he had, left very tightly. "Here's what I'd like to do," Everett said. "And I'd like you to hear all of it before you say no, because I can see you getting ready to say no. First thing, today, you and your children are not spending another night outside. I have corporate apartments this company keeps for relocating executives. One of them is yours starting tonight, furnished, warm, for as long as you need it. And there is no charge and no string, because a man cannot stand back up while he's spending every ounce of himself just staying warm. That part is not a job offer, and it is not charity. It is just me refusing to let 2 5-year-olds sleep outside one more night in a city my name is all over. You'll let me have that one. The rest we can argue about." Andre's jaw worked. He looked at the twins, asleep now on the sofa. Full, warm, safe for the first time in 9 nights. And whatever argument he had been building could not survive the sight of them. And he gave a single short nod. And Everett Crane went on, gently before the man's pride could regroup. Second thing, you ran a press break. You're a fabricator. Mr. Jacobs, I started this company with a welding truck and these 2 hands. And I will tell you something I know in my bones. You cannot find good fabricators, real ones. Men who can hold a tolerance and show up and give a damn. And I have 40 positions open across this company right now that I cannot fill. I'm not making you a job. I'm offering you one you're qualified for, with benefits, with a wage you can raise these children on. An on-site childcare, which this company has because I built it after I watched too many good people forced to choose between a shift and their kids. You would be doing me a favor. That's not charity either. That's me hiring a skilled veteran before a smarter competitor does. And here, Andre Jacobs finally found his voice, rough and low, the words coming hard. I can't take a house and a job for sitting on a bench, he said. I didn't do anything. I kept my kids. Any man would keep his kids. I'm not somebody you owe something to. I'll take work. I'll work harder than anybody you've got. But I pay my own way. That's the whole reason I'm on that bench. Because I don't take what I didn't earn. I know, said Everett Crane. Gabe told me you'd say exactly that. That's the entire reason I'm offering it. A man who'd rather freeze than take what he didn't earn is precisely the man I want holding a job in my company and raising children in this city. The apartment is restitution for a policy of mine that treated men like your father, and like mine, and like you, as an unfavorable impression to be cleared away. The job is not a gift. It's the smartest hire I'll make this year. And the last thing. He paused, and his voice changed, went quiet and certain. You have a rule. Gabe told me. Nobody gets left behind. You lived by it for your men, and you've damn near died by it for your babies. Well, you've been carrying that rule alone for 14 months, and I'm here to tell you that as of this morning, you are not carrying it alone anymore. Because now there are some other people who know that rule, and who've decided it applies to you too. Nobody is leaving you behind, son. Not on my watch, and not on his. He nodded at Gabe, standing by the door, who had to look away. Andre Jacobs put his face in his hands, there in a warm office 30 floors above the bench where he had kept the longest watch of his life. And the discipline that had held for 9 nights and 14 months finally, safely, gave way. He wept, and Everett Crane and Gabe Mercer, 2 hard men who knew the cost of the line this one had held, sat with him and did not look away, and did not say anything. Because some watches you stand for someone else, so that for one moment they can finally stand down. That first night, Gabe Mercer himself drove them to the apartment, a clean furnished 2-bedroom on the 9th floor of a building Crane Industries kept for visiting executives. And he carried the duffel bags up, though Andre tried to take them. And he showed them how the heat worked and where the light switches were. And then he did the thing that told Andre more than any speech could have. He wrote his own personal cell number on a pad by the phone and said, "You call me, day or night. For anything, I mean it." And he left them to it. And Andre Jacobs stood in the middle of a warm, quiet, clean apartment with his 2 children and did not know what to do with his hands. The twins did. Children adjust to mercy faster than adults, who have learned to distrust it. Maya discovered the bathtub and could not believe it was theirs. An entire tub of hot water. And Andre ran her a bath and then ran Malik one and washed the park out of them properly for the first time in 9 days. Real soap and hot water and clean towels. And the warmth eased Maya's cough almost at once. the way he had known it would, the way he had not been able to give her on the bench, and something in his chest that had been clenched for 9 nights began, very slowly, to let go. There were real beds, with clean sheets, one for each of them in the second room, and the twins climbed in and looked at him with the dazed delight of children who have been told the camping trip is over. And Maya asked, "Are we home now, Daddy?" And Andre Jacobs, who had promised himself he would not cry in front of them again, had to turn and study the wall a moment before he could answer her. "Almost, baby," he said. "Almost. We're almost home. Close your eyes." He read them the red book. In a warm room, in real beds, under a real roof. He read them the same book he had read them on the bench. And it was the same words and an entirely different world. And they were asleep before he finished, both of them, deeply, safely, the loose, abandoned sleep of children who do not have to be brave. And Andre stood in the doorway and watched them breathe. And then he did not go to the bed that had been made up for him. He could not yet. He lay down on the floor between his children's 2 beds, close enough to touch them both, the way he had slept on the bench, because 9 nights of standing watch do not switch off in one evening. And a body that has learned the children are only safe if he is between them. And the dark does not unlearn it, just because the dark now has walls. He lay on the floor of a warm apartment with one hand resting on the frame of each bed. And for the first time in 9 nights, Andre Jacobs slept all the way down for 8 hours and did not surface once, because for the first time in 14 months, someone else was standing the watch. There was more, and it grew over the months that followed into something neither Andre nor Everett had quite intended on that first morning. Because once Everett Crane had seen the one man on the bench, he could not unsee the others, and he was not a man who did things by halves. He killed the clearing policy across every Crane property and replaced it with something his lawyers thought was insane and his conscience knew was overdue. A partnership with the city and the veterans' services and the family shelters to do the one thing the systems so rarely managed: to keep families together, fathers with children, twins with each other, while they got back on their feet. He funded it himself the first year, and he named it, after some thought, the Tanya Jacobs Family Fund, because Andre had told him in that first conversation that the whole nightmare had started with a good woman dying at a kitchen sink, and Everett had decided her name should be on the thing that made sure other families did not fall the way his had let Andre's fall. And he put Gabe Mercer in charge of part of it, because Gabe, it turned out, had been quietly sick of moving people along for years. And a man who is sick of the wrong thing is exactly the man you want building the right one. 1 year later, on a cold, bright morning in late October, almost exactly a year from the day he walked out of the impound lot with nowhere to go, Andre Jacobs dropped Malik and Maya at the kindergarten near the small, warm, entirely their own apartment that his own wages now paid for, kissed them both, and drove to the Crane Industries fabrication plant where he ran a press break again, better than anyone on his shift, and where, 6 months in, they had made him a lead because he showed up and he held his tolerances and he gave a damn and he was, his supervisor said, the kind of man you build a floor around. He had not taken a thing he had not earned. He had only finally been given the one thing a man in his situation almost never gets, which is a hand from someone who saw him before he hit the very bottom, and the chance to climb the rest of the way himself. He and Gabe Mercer became, over that year, the kind of friends that only 2 soldiers can be. And on Sundays, Gabe came to dinner in the small apartment, and the twins called him Uncle Gabe. And sometimes Everett Crane came too, an old man who had rediscovered, late, that there were things worth more than the view from the top of a tower. and he would sit at Andre's small table and let Maya tell him long, important stories. And he looked, Gabe said once, 10 years younger when he left than when he came. The battered red picture book, the one Maya had read aloud on the bench to keep Malik calm, sat now on a real shelf in a real room, between the twins' 2 real beds. And Andre read it to them every night. And they did not remember the bench, not really, which was the entire point, which was the thing he had spent 9 sleepless nights and everything he had purchasing for them. That they would grow up knowing only that their daddy had them, that whatever came, they were clean and fed and unafraid and not ever going to be left behind. And on the wall above the shelf hung a photograph of a laughing woman at a kitchen table, and below it, in a small frame, a pair of dog tags. And the children knew the woman was their mother, and that she had loved them more than the whole world, and that everything good that had come to them had her name on it somewhere. Even the fund across the city that kept other families together. Even that, especially that, because nothing about their father was ever going to leave anybody behind. I want to tell you something, here at the end, the way I do. When I wrote this story, I kept thinking about all the benches, all the cars, all the weekly motels, all the couches, all the careful performances of fine that are happening right now, tonight, within a few miles of wherever you are sitting, families holding a line you cannot see them holding. We walk past them. The towers look down and do not see. And the thing this story is really about is not the CEO, and it is not even the father, brave as he was. It is the bodyguard. It is the man who was told to move someone along, and who instead, for the first time in years, sat down. Because most of us are not going to be the billionaire who can fix it. But almost all of us, at some point, are the person walking past the bench. The person who could keep going, who has every reason and every instruction to keep going, and who could choose, instead, to stop and to sit down and to see. That is a thing within reach of every single one of us. And you never know, when you do it, whose 9-night watch you are about to end. So let me leave you with a question tonight. When was the last time you really saw someone the world had decided to walk past? And what would it cost you, really, to sit down beside them? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and it always means more than you know. And one real thing before I go. Because this story is gentle, but the trouble in it is happening for real, tonight, to real families. If you or someone you love is on the edge of losing housing, or already there, please know that help exists and that asking for it is not the same as being left behind. You can dial 211 from almost anywhere in the United States to reach a real person who can connect you to housing, food, and family services in your area. And if you are a veteran or you love one who is facing homelessness, the National Call Center for Homeless Veterans is staffed around the clock at 1-8774-243838. You served. You do not have to stand this watch alone. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that one person choosing to stop and sit down can change everything. Subscribe for a new story every week. And the next time you pass a bench, remember, you have no idea what kind of watch is being stood on it. Or that you might be the one who gets to say, at last, nobody's leaving you behind. Thank you for being here with me. I'll see you in the next one.